Khoon Goh joining us. He's head of Asia Research at ANZ Research. Thank you so much, Khoon, for speaking with us today. Always a pleasure to have you on. Let's just start with your take on the US-EU trade deal and how the rhetoric has changed very sharply from "I don't think a deal is going to happen" to both of them, the pictures of the two heads of state shaking hands and then saying, okay, 15% it is.
Yeah, I think this is once again another classic Trump negotiating tactic. Threaten, talk tough, and then at the end of the day, settle on something that is agreeable to both parties. Overall, the EU-US trade deal settling at 50% tariff level. That's a similar rate to the deal that Japan reached. So we're getting a better sense of where the tariff landscape is starting to land. It looks like, for EU and Japan, both major important trading partners and ally of the United States, 15% is as good as it gets for them. For the rest of Southeast Asia, we're landing at rates of closer to 20%. And for the others like Singapore and the UK, which managed to get a deal, it's around a 10% rate. So a 10 to 20% rate is looking like where most of the trade deals will end up settling once this is all done and said.
So with that in mind, and seemingly some of that is getting settled, of course, here in India, we're still waiting for that deal to be announced. And a lot of people are talking about the possibility of less than 20% for India as well. And assuming that that does come through, then where does the attention shift for global markets, in your opinion? And where does the smart money go at this point?
Well, given that markets have pretty much partially priced in, sort of trade deals of this magnitude, which is why, you haven't really seen, a further big move in markets. Where to next would be seeing how the global economy pans out and whether or not the Fed will start to ease rates from September. The FOMC this week is, of course, a major focus, but let's be honest, no one is expecting the Fed to be cutting rates at their July meeting. And if they do surprise with a rate cut, then there'll be a lot of questions about Fed independence, given the amount of pressure that President Trump has been putting on the Fed to cut rates. But I think what will be overshadowed by the FOMC this week is questions to Fed Chair Powell about whether or not he's going to resign. I think that's going to sadly overshadow it. But I think apart from that, if the Fed were indeed to think of the possibility of cutting in September, they really need to start to send a signal in the language in this week's meeting and in the press conference as well. So I think that's going to be the next phase of market attention. And closer to home in Asia, how do the new level of tariffs, how does that impact on Asian growth? I mean, Asian Q2 GDP so far from the countries that have reported have been coming in much better than expected, but we all know that's temporarily boosted by all this front-loading activity in their exports. That's going to come to an end soon, even with trade deals getting done. So we're going to see payback. So how much of that will drag on second half growth in this region? That's also the other major focal point for markets.
Khoon, assuming that it turns out to be a non-event, that is the Fed, and if indeed India and US fail to reach a trade deal by the end of August, and there is some uncertainty before it finally gets settled, but in the near term, could that be a further dampener for Indian markets? Because we've seen some bit of selling in the last few days, some short positions built up there. Could there be more?
Look, I think in the case of India, a couple of months ago, there had been expectations that India could be one of the first countries to secure a trade deal with the US. So there had already been some anticipation built up then. But, up to now, we are towards the end of July, and we had several trade deals already announced, and yet India is not in the frame. So I think that some, questions over how close India is to securing a deal. Now, assuming that India can manage to get a fairly decent deal, then I think that we could start to see some relief rally coming back in. But in the event that a deal or not so positive deal gets announced, then yeah, that's a risk that we could see some further pushback or disappointment by investors for Indian markets, particularly given that valuations in India are somewhat stretched at the moment.
Interesting take there, and it's just a couple of days. I guess that we just have to wait for that deadline to come through. Khoon Goh, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Pleasure speaking with you.